Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Deleon, and today I will be sharing with you information about international law on climate change. So when we are going to talk about climate change and the policies that countries are taking to reduce their carbon footprint, the first thing we have to talk about is the UNFCCC. So the UNFCCC that stands for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was a treaty made by the UN back in 1992, agreed by from 166 different countries. Um, their mission statement is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that will prevent major damage to humans caused by climate change. It's also very important to note that this was established in 1992, and we had seen record high levels back in the 50s and even before that. So, um, although they did acknowledge the problem, they acknowledged it very, very late. Um, the UNFCCC holds different goals and standards depending on how your country is doing. All countries are responsible with reducing emissions within their own borders. However, developed countries are also expected to contribute to funding for developing countries and their efforts. So developed countries have to not only reduce emissions in their own borders, but also fund and help developing countries reduce emissions in their borders. Along with doing that, both countries are expected to implement policies and advocate for prevention and educate their population. Um, all very important things in stopping climate change. So we're looking right here on the graph on the right, we are looking at the CCPI, or the Climate Change Performance Index. And these are the current rankings among all of the countries in the UN um, on how they're doing with reducing their carbon footprint. We'll go ahead on the next slide to look at some very notable rankings, but the first thing I want you guys to notice and understand is if you look the first three places, first, second, and third, the top three slots have remained vacant since the rankings begin because no country has yet to meet the expectations and requirements set by the CCPI to get those rankings. So we have Denmark, which is the current leading country, but it only ranks fourth place, even though it is leading. Uh, Other notable rankings, we have the United Kingdom at fifth, right behind it. And then we put Luxembourg. Luxembourg's at eighth. A trend you'll very much see when looking at the CCPI is a lot of small countries with not much industry um, are going to rank very high, and this is probably because small countries just have less physically that they can contribute, and they also just produce less emissions in general because they don't have as much industry as others. When looking at the big countries, we have India at 23rd, China at 54th, and the United States at 65th. India is doing all right, but China and the US, especially the US, is very, very, very low. And despite being one of the most influential countries in the world, the US isn't even close to carbon neutral. If you look back at the graph on your own at the CCPI, it's divided into different segments on different ways you can combat climate change. And when you look at the US relative to other countries, you'll see that there's almost no investment in climate policy and renewable energy, again, compared to other countries. Another big importance in the US is education. Um, Many people in the US still debate on the existence of climate change, while other countries are debating on how important it is or how aggressive they should be. We're still trying to figure out if it actually exists or not. So education is a very big concern for the US. Um, Other countries like Denmark, again, Denmark is the leading country. They almost have a countrywide consensus on that, on climate change being very, very important. and because of that, you see them ranked fourth. So, what are the top countries doing right? We're going to look at Denmark. Denmark is going to serve as a blueprint for all the other countries. If they are in the lead, then we can look to them to see what they are doing right and how can we replicate that. So, a big acknowledgement on Denmark's part recently is through their livestock and farmland as some of their biggest carbon footprint contributors. So, they have several methods to reduce these factors, like taxing farmers based on how much methane they produce from their livestock, and also taxing the nitrogen emissions from fertilizer runoff. Um, as for the methane, they decided to look at that because agriculture takes up about 28% of Denmark's total emissions. And a lot of that comes from the livestock cattle. When methane is produced, the abundance of that methane gas traps a lot of heat and CO2 in the atmosphere, overall raising the temperature. Um, Regarding the nitrogen emissions, Denmark is hoping to convert 15% of their farmland back into forests to reduce the nitrogen fertilizer runoff. And this happens when there's a lot of fertilizer that gets washed away in the rain. It carries big groups of nitrogen and it pollutes the nearby water habitats. And once you get enough pollution of nitrogen, the water is undrinkable and the fish in those habitats die off. But Denmark's big recent push is to have current policies and future ones be implemented to hold farmers accountable for their contributions to the climate change. It's very important that whatever they add, they need to make sure it doesn't hurt them economically. That's a big rule from the UNFCCC, is to not get in the way of your own or other countries' economies while trying to combat global warming. Looking at some other Denmark policies, they are they're attacking climate change on every level when it comes to the government, public industry, private industries, and individuals. When looking at the private industries, they are implementing taxes on both the act of producing products and how those products will increase emissions once used. So an example is factories producing gas cars are going to be taxed for the capital or the factory materials, the actual making of the car, because that will give carbon emissions. But not only are they taxed for that, but they will be taxed because the product that they're making will also lead to contributing carbon emissions. So it's kind of a double tax. You get taxed on the means of making something, and if that product will contribute to more carbon emissions, you also get taxed based on the product that you make. As for the government, public industry, or individuals, Denmark is very much incentivizing the use of trains and high efficiency vehicles. So there's going to be increased taxes on any transportation that produces emissions. Think of like moving trucks within Denmark or any very short plane rides or anything that starts and ends in Denmark. Those will be taxed. And then for the individual, there will be tax deductions given out to those with carbon neutral vehicles. Another big part in Denmark's success that we touched on earlier is education and advocacy of their citizens. Over 80% of Denmark's citizens agree that climate change is the biggest threat to the planet and society. If we compare that to the US, only about 48% think that climate change is a serious problem. This difference is a very big indicator on how quickly and effectively new policies can be implemented, because if you have 80% of your population agreeing that there is a big problem, not only will you have more votes towards policy that you would want to attack climate change, but also it would push politicians into a sense of urgency. It feels a lot more urgent if 80% of your population is upset about something rather than only 48%. Because of all these things, Denmark is acting like a perfect blueprint for other developed and developing countries. And in order to reach um, carbon neutral, we would want to follow in their footsteps. So, how does the future look? Um, Based on Denmark's goals, their plans are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 65% by 2030. And again, these are compared to levels in the 1990s. If you look at the graph on the left, you can see by the time 1990 rolls around, we're almost double what we should be. Um, so there's still work to go once we reach 1990s levels. But of course, the ultimate goal for all countries should be to reach carbon neutrality. Thank you so much. These are my sources. Have a wonderful day.